Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Jump On Air. We're really happy you've chosen to spend some of your Wednesday with us as we talk about statistics, science, data, and of course, Jump. My name is Julian Paris. I'm the Learning Strategy Manager here at Jump Software. And as always, I get the privilege to be your host for Jump On Air. We have a really great schedule for you today, full of interesting speakers sharing their knowledge and sharing their stories. And I really can't wait to share what they have to share with you. So I'm going to show the schedule throughout the day, and so I'll do my best to keep us on track to the minute. And like I've said before, I do this for a really important point, which is that we know your day is busy and you may have to drop off and go do other things. We hope, though, if you leave, that you'll come back and join us again for some other episodes. You can do that easily just by going to jump.com/jumponair from any device you want, your iPad, your phone, and you'll be connected right back to our live stream. So if you have to leave, or if you want to take us with you, remember that URL and join us again. Now, after today's episode, you'll be redirected to the community page that has all the episode details from today, as well as the recording. And that episode page allows you to interact with us, give us comments or feedback about the episode, or even suggestions. And in fact, if you go to the Jump On Air section of the community, which you can find by going to community.jump.com and clicking on the Jump On Air section. In there, you'll find all the on-demand recordings from any of the episodes you see, and you can interact with any of the speakers that have presented to us. So we really want to connect with you, our Jump users, and so that's the best way to do it for anything about Jump On Air. So today, we have a great schedule, but before we get to that, I always like to do a little bit of a segment. I'm trying some different things, and today is going to be science stories you might have missed. I already told you on the last episode, or actually it was on Friday, that I've always loved science. And so I have a habit of browsing through Google Scholar and seeing what things have popped out new. And it's kind of fun to always keep up on these. So there may be things you miss, and I want to draw attention to some of the ones that I think are especially neat. Okay, so to get into this, I'm actually going to have to turn the lights up. And I'm sorry to tell you this, I'm actually going to have to give you a test. But don't worry, it's not a test that you need to have studied for, but as a former professor, I know how stressful pop quizzes can be, so don't worry, this one's pretty easy. I want you to look at this circle and tell me what you see. Of course, you can't tell me, but think to yourself, what do you see in that circle? So keep that in your head. I want to show you another one. Did I tell you this was an easy test? What do you see in there? Well, if you had an easy time, you probably saw a 74 in the first one, and a 6 in the second one. And many of you have probably guessed these are the Sciarra plates for testing for color vision. Now, I have to admit something. This test is hard for me. In fact, I see nothing in that first plate and nothing in the second plate. And I'm afraid that maybe I exposed some of you to have not seen, or expose some of you to the fact that maybe you don't see anything in there either. And so you, like me, might be red-green colorblind or some variant of color blindness. And I actually didn't realize this for a long time. So if you haven't in the past, don't feel bad. It took me quite a while. I was getting an eye test when I was in middle school, and I found out I needed glasses. As you can tell, I was extremely popular. And I found out at the eye doctor when I had my test for getting glasses that I was colorblind. And this actually explained a lot of things about me, going back many years. And it explained, well, it didn't explain that haircut. Thanks, Mom. Or why I wore ties and suit jackets. That was actually all on me. I even carried a briefcase when I was in elementary school. As there always is, there's a lot to unpack with that. But the one thing it does explain is that I used to draw oceans as purple. And my teachers maybe thought I was just being creative. I just couldn't tell the difference between purples and blues. And to this day, that is still something I have trouble with. Because my type of color blindness makes it difficult to distinguish those colors. Now, color vision is actually a pretty interesting thing. It's not as though we just perceive a color specifically. It's actually the way we have populations of cells in our retina that detect colors. And to give you a brief overview of it, there's essentially 3 populations of cells, the short, medium, and long, that are maximally sensitive to a particular wavelength of light. And those cells actually still respond to wavelengths that are off that maximal peak, but they purposefully respond to a specific peak. So color deficits occur when one of a few things happens. Either those populations of cells attend to the wrong wavelength, maybe they're red shifted or green shifted, or maybe those particular cells are deficient in some way. They fire less than they should. All of these things have problems because upstream in the visual processing centers, they're expecting those cells to respond in a particular way to particular wavelengths of light and to give us the qualia of the different colors. So for me, my long cones are actually shifted towards green, and so they respond to an inaccurate color spectra, which gives me a particular type of color deficiency. And depending on your deficiencies, you end up in one of these different types. Okay, so the science story that I came across is a pretty neat one. This popped up in Optics Letters just a few days ago, and it's by some researchers at Tel Aviv University, Sharon, who's a PhD student, and Tal, her advisor. And what they figured out was a way to bind a metasurface to the convexity of a contact lens to actually create a contact lens that specifically corrects for color blindness. That is, they're able to, and there's a lot in this slide, but if you look at just their figure B here, they're able to move in color space particular wavelengths. And this isn't just a matter of coloring the contact lens. It's actually specifically distorting, I sense, colors in the spectra to move it into a space that the brain is expecting. And so these can be custom made and bound to the actual convex surface. And that was the real insight, that they can do this on this level with this particular material. And it was quite a big leap forward. Now, I'm sorry to say that this isn't clinically available yet. You can't go to your eye doctor and request these color-correcting contact lenses yet, but it is something that probably will go into clinical trials in the future. And in fact, if you really now know you are colorblind and want to try out correcting that, there are actual lens makers that will make you glasses that do this kind of color correction. That's actually been something we've had for a little while. It's a much less difficult problem than binding it to a convex contact lens. So way to go, Sharon and Tal. This is really cool, and I'm very excited that I got to share this science story with you. All right, so now on to our main program. Our next speaker is someone I'm really, really excited to introduce. He is the co-founder of SAS. He is the creator of JMP software. On a personal note, he's someone I look up to, and not just because he is so much taller than I am. I'm, of course, talking about John Sall, who's going to be taking us through his talk entitled Machines of Fit.
So you won't need your color vision in order to understand the next topic, but it is about seeing things. And so let me share my screen. And so my screen should be coming through now. So I'm going to talk about visualization, but it's in a different sense than we usually mean it. It's not about what you see with your eyes, but more like what you see when you close your eyes and you use your inner eyes, your insight, and how you perceive and imagine feeling the forces and energies involved in a situation. But we're still talking about statistics, statistical fitting, which is a very abstract concept. So visualizing statistical fits means converting the concepts of statistics into mechanical metaphors. And we refer to those metaphors when we design the graphics. And with these metaphors, we can understand things better, and we can get the intuition of how fitting really works. So statistical fitting is really an optimization problem. We talk about maximum likelihood or minimizing the squares of error. And so optimization problems, if you study it, is mainly about balancing forces. So you reach an optimum where moving from that position to another position takes energy. And at the optimum, the net forces are zero, the net derivative is zero, the stored energy is at a minimum. So as we balance the forces and reach this minimum energy solution, we can think about it in terms of simple machines. And here we're going to use springs and gas pressure cylinders to visualize the forces and energies. So we have two laws to consider. First, the law of springs, due to Robert Hooke, who lived in the 1600s and was the curator of experiments for the Royal Society in the Age of Enlightenment. And the other pioneer was Robert Boyle, who formulated the law of gases, also in the same age of Enlightenment. And he was considered the father of modern chemistry. So we have Hooke's law and Boyle's law, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Now, I'm not the first to invoke Hooke's law and springs, and it's been done before. In fact, there's a book about it by R.W. Fairbrother on visualizing statistical models and concepts. And he refers to actual Newcomb more than 100 years ago, who did the same thing. But the gas pressure idea is perhaps something a little bit newer, but it's one of my favorites. So with continuous responses, we're going to talk about springs. And with categorical responses, we're going to talk about probabilities and gas pressure. So Hooke's law and Boyle's law. So let me do a little demo. We're going to open up a big class, and we have here a plot of height by weight. Now let's first suppose we're going to estimate the mean height. Well, imagine connected to each point is a spring, and the other end of that spring is connected to a horizontal line. And so we can imagine we have to stretch that spring from its distance of 0 to whatever the residual is going to be to connect it to that point. And we can pull that line and put it anywhere we want. And each position that we pull it to is going to store a different amount of energy, and the forces are going to be pulling one way or the other. And here you see most of the forces of all these springs in red are pulling upward, and there's only a few pulling downward. And so if we are going to release that spring, I'll press the go button, and until it finally settles down and all the forces are equalized between one side and the other, it's storing the minimum amount in those springs. So we can also allow the line of fit to not just be horizontal, and instead of fitting the mean, it's going to fit the regression line. And so if I press the go button and allow it to have a slope, then it's going to feel the forces of those springs running vertical from each point to the line of fit. And the place that balances all the forces, both vertically and rotationally, is going to be the least squares regression line, as we'll see in a few minutes. And so that's Hooke's law in operation for continuous items. So how does a spring really behave? And here we see Hooke's law. So as you stretch a spring from its 0 initial resting state to some distance, the force increases linearly with distance. That's Hooke's law. And so the tension in the spring, or force, is the displacement, x minus mu, and that displacement is then scaled by the spring constant, how strong the spring is, and we're going to call that 1 over sigma squared. And so how much energy does it take to stretch the spring from its 0 position to some distance x from the resting point mu? Well, the energy is just the integral of that force integrated over the distance. And so it starts with a small amount of force, and that force is increasing. And if you integrate this straight line, you get the equation for energy, which is 1/2, that's the triangle area, of x minus mu squared times the spring constant 1 over sigma squared. So that's Hooke's law, the behavior of springs. And so notice the squared term, that's the important part. So let's go to the next visualization and imagine what we did with the animation before, fitting a mean. So connecting each point to the line of fit, we need to stretch the springs in order to reach that line of fit. And that line of fit we consider to be movable. And as you move the line up and down, the tensions on one side or the other will vary until we reach a balance point. And at that balance point where the forces on one side and the other are equal, that's the position of minimum energy among the springs. And that least squares position is the balancing position for springs, and also is the least square solution that we have for fitting a mean. So let's test a hypothesis with that. So here on the left, we have everything perfectly balanced, and we record the energy in the springs. And then we say, well, I have a hypothesized mean that's a little less than the sample mean. And so I'm going to move that line of fit down and have to increase the energy I put in the springs in order to make that happen. And now it's not balanced anymore. I've had to add energy to the system. That energy we have to add can be expressed in terms of a sum of squares, the same sum of squares for the energy equation. And that is the sum of squares due to that hypothesis. And so the more I have to stretch and store energy in the springs, the less likely that hypothesized mean is going to be the true mean. Okay, so visualizing a hypothesis test using this spring metaphor can be useful. Another situation we have concerns one-way analysis of variance, that is, testing that two or more means are equal. So we can visualize each mean estimated separately, and here we have 4 observations among 3 different groups, each connected by a spring, the observation connected by a spring to a line of fit, which will be the sample mean for each group. And it's in a state of balance or minimum energy stored in the springs by fitting separate means. But now we hypothesize that really the means for all these groups are the same. And so we do that by aligning all these lines of fit to be one line of fit and finding the balanced position for fitting just a single mean. And the amount of energy we have to add to those springs in order to force that constraint will then be the sum of squares to that hypothesis. And so testing in the one-way layout or the two-sample means test is exactly analogous to adding energy to a set of springs in order to force that constraint. So what about concepts like design of experiments, where we want the most powerful design to make our tests the most powerful? So consider an unbalanced design where we have 6 observations in one group and 2 observations in the other group. Well, where we have 6 observations, there are a lot of springs, and it's forcing the line of fit to be very stiff. It's going to be very difficult to move that line of fit away from the true mean. But where we have only 2 springs, it's going to be very easy. And so it's going to be easy to move this line of fit up to the others, and we're not going to have a very powerful test of hypotheses. The sum of squares due to that hypotheses is not going to be as great as if we have a balanced design. And with a balanced design where we have an equal number of observations, then we have a more powerful test. And so that, unfolds into the theory of design of experiments for what the most powerful design is. Now, what about if we have different variances in each of the groups? So on the left, let's suppose that we have a greater error variance. And remember, the spring constant is 1 over sigma squared. So that means we have very weak spring constant. Then that mean is not held very tightly, and we can move it without using very much energy. But if we have a much smaller error variance, meaning a much larger spring constant, 1 over sigma squared, then it's going to take a lot more energy to move those springs. And so the idea of reducing residual variance to make test hypothesis more sensitive means that we increase the strength of the springs, decrease sigma squared. And if we have 2 groups, for example, with different variances, the allocation of samples between the 2 groups should be related to the spring constant or the error variance between the groups. Okay, so lots of metaphors work through from springs into statistical concepts. Same is true with sample size. If we have a smaller sample with only a few observations, the means are not held very tightly, and it's easy to pull them together. But if we have a lot more observations where the line of fit was held by a lot more springs connected to observations, then it's going to be a lot more difficult. And so as we increase sample size, we increase the power of the test, the greater sigma squares, in order to test that hypothesis. Okay, so we've covered fitting means across classifications. What about regression lines? And as we saw at the beginning, this time we're balancing in two different directions, up and down, and the slope or angle of the line. And so the line is where the force is governing both those is at a minimum energy solution. If we want to test the hypothesis that X doesn't affect Y, then we're constraining the line of fit to be horizontal. And if we do that and balance out that situation, the energy stored in the springs compared with the unconstrained line is the test for the hypothesis that the slope is zero. So given that, that leads to concepts like leverage. Supposing our X's are distributed fairly closely together in our sample, then we are fitting those springs near the middle of the line, and we can pretty much pull that lever of a line one way or the other, and it's going to be pretty easy because the springs are not constraining the slope very tightly. They're maybe constraining it up and down, but not to vary the slope. But if we put our observations at the end of the lines and separate them out, then we have a lot more leverage, and therefore our test, hypothesis test, will be more powerful to test that. And that's a basic principle of DOE, to basically separate your values widely as practical in order to make a more powerful test. So that's the concept of springs in testing hypotheses. But now we have categorical responses as well. So how do we do that? Well, we imagine things sort of like tire pumps. Remember, with a tire pump, it's very relaxed at the top. And as if we push that tire pump down to compress the air in it, it gets, we feel more and more force as that tire pump then gets compressed down to towards a zero distance between the end of the piston, that tire pump, and the bottom of the cylinder. And so in the same way as we use springs, we can imagine tire pumps or some form of compression, gas compression. And we divide up our sample into a space where we have a partition between each space, which corresponds to a line of fit. And what we're doing is feeling the forces of gas pressure between all these partitions and balancing it. So the forces acting on one side and the other, and on one side may include forces from many categories, many response levels, pushing one way versus the other. And as those balance out, then we're going to get the minimum gas energy in the system. So if I pull this down and make them unrelated to the ratio of the number of samples in each level, then I have unequal energies. And this is also analogous from big class, where I am estimating the age proportions, the probability that you're in a given age group in this sample of data. And so in the age group 12, I have 8 observations, and that corresponds to the 8 observations in the lowest component. And with age 13, I have 7, and that corresponds to the 7 in the next, and so on. In the last 2 for 16 and 17, I only have 3 observations, so only 3 gas molecules or tire pumps in that category. And now if I want to let it go and equilibrate, but so that the line of fit is equalized across all these things, then I see that the distance between each one is proportional to the rate that those things occur in the population. And so the rates that I see in my population are the minimum energy or balancing solution to the equations for the gas pressure across these partitions, where they all add up to 1. So now let's see how it works in theory. And here we have Boyle's law. So with Boyle's law, we'll start out normalized at the position of 1, where the pressure inside the cylinder and is basically equivalent to the atmospheric pressure. And then as we pressurize the cylinder, then we feel greater and greater force as we're pressurizing the cylinder to move farther down and compress the gas. And so it turns out that the pressure is 1 over P, the position of the cylinder. And of course, it can get infinite if in an ideal situation, the pressure gets infinite as we try to pressure it towards 0. So now we feel this pressure inversely related to the P, or the probability rate we're attributing to the statistical solution. And so we need an equation for energy stored in the system. So the energy is just the integral from 1 down to whatever position P we have. And it turns out the energy at 1 is normalized, the log of 1 is 0. And so as we go from there down to P, the integration of that of the reciprocal 1 over P is minus the log of P. Okay, so the energy we store in the gas pressure is minus log of the probability. So this turns out to be the negative log likelihood of a statistical system doing pretty much the same thing, but in terms of log likelihood or negative log likelihood rather than gas pressure. So let's see how we can visualize a situation. And here's the situation where we have the carpole example, where let's say we have a sample of 13, and 6 people chose American brands, 2 people chose European brands of cars, and 5 people chose Asian brands of cars. And so if we load up pressure cylinders into each of these compartments, where we can move the line between the compartments one way or the other, and then each cylinder is identical, and what we want to do is balance the net pressure in each partition so that it balances out to the minimum energy stored in all these gas cylinders. And it turns out that you do that by just estimating probabilities, or the log likelihood, the maximum likelihood solution to storing those energies turns out to be the rates in the population, or 5 out of 13, 2 out of 13, and 6 out of 13. And that minimizes the total energy in those gas cylinders. Or you can also represent those gas cylinders as just units of gas pushing in these compartments, and think about the kinetic theory of gases doing pretty much the same thing as the pressure cylinders do. So how do you do across groups? Well, let's say that you divide your carpole example so you have a different groups corresponding to young people, middle-aged people, and older people, and they have different preferences, and they're going to have different response counts for each of the car preferences for American, European, and Asian brands. And so if we then solve the same system by minimizing the energy and balancing the pressure of these partitions, then it's going to estimate different rates in different ones of these groups. And so now our next thing is to think of how I'm going to test the hypothesis for this. And to test the hypothesis that the rates are the same across these groups means moving these partitions to be the same across groups, balancing it with that constraint to the minimum energy solution subject to that constraint, and the amount of energy I've had to add to the system in order to do that will be the negative log likelihood to calculate a chi-square test. Same idea as sum of squares, but it's using gas pressure instead of that. And the same thing can be done with the continuous responses, where I can think of a tire pump or a gas pressure cylinder at each position of the x's, and they have to fit in these partitions where the line of partitions are constrained to be of a logistic or a probit curve. And then I balance all those positions. I see here that this tire pump has had to be compressed a lot. So this is like an outlier in a categorical sense. It's a pretty large X corresponding to what X would be expected. And so it's an unlikely value, but it corresponds to fitting this situation. So now I think about these gas pressure cylinders in terms of strengths of relationships. So if I have a near perfect fit and a logistic regression, I have complete separation between, some value of X separates the one response category from another response category. If I have a strong relationship, instead of complete separation, there's a partial separation, but there's a lot more going on in one versus another. And if I have a weak relationship, then these gas pressure cylinders are fairly equally distributed across that relationship. And so the line of fit is close to a straight line. And I have a weak relationship, and the energy in order to constrain it to a perfectly straight line will be very small compared to what I'd have to add to a system where we have a near perfect fit. So all this goes into designing the graphs so that when we see a graph, we think about forces and energy. So let's think about the continuous case. And we think about fitting a mean, and we think about this like a vertical scatter plot, and we think of springs attached to that. And this is the balance point that balances all those springs for a univariate continuous response. For a one-way situation, we think about fitting a different mean to each of these, and springs connected to each point. And then if I constrain it and fit it to the straight line, how much energy I would have to add to the system goes to the sum of squares to that hypothesis. They're the same. Similar with continuous, I think about springs attached from each point to the line of fit, and how strong I would have to, or how much energy I would have to add in order to stretch that line of fit to be horizontal. And similarly, in categorical, I think about gas pressure when I do these divided bar charts. Now, a divided bar chart is not very good for estimating rates compared to just single bars. But a divided bar chart is good for visualizing the gas pressure illusion of the solution being to equalize the pressure in each compartment of these chambers. And then when I do several groups instead of just one, then I get to the mosaic plot where these divided bar charts are side by side and proportional to that. And I can think of how much energy I have to add the system to make these compartments align across each of that. And that's the likelihood ratio test for that hypothesis. This is one reason why I like likelihood ratio tests better than Pearson tests, even though both are similarly powerful in most categorical situations. Because I can think of the gas pressure when I do this. And the same thing is when I think of compartments in a continuous logistic regression. In this case, I think about maybe these points are air molecules bouncing back and forth vertically. And as with only a few points out here, the line of fit is dominated more by the other things. And I can think of logistic regression that way. So that's the way I think of visualization, seeing the forces and energies in graphs, which you can't see directly. It's not something that's visual. It's something you sense as you use these mechanical metaphors, Hooke's law and Boyle's law, in order to drive the statistical concepts. So that's it from me. Back to Julian.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. I found that unbelievably interesting. And I'll be sure to get that journal from you so we can share it with our users on the episode page for today's show. So thank you again, John, for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you around Jump On Air. Our next section is going to be Pete and Mary taking us through, or acting out, I should say, a real-life situation where a jump tip actually comes to the rescue. So here's our tip of the day.
Hi, welcome to Jump On Air's Tip of the Day. Today, Mary and I are going to be going over Column Viewer, and I was talking to our colleague Tom, and he says you really love Column Viewer. I don't ever use that tool. Why do you like it so much, Mary? What's so great about Column Viewer?
I don't know, Pete. You're making my day. All right.
That was easy. All right.
Let me share my screen. So
Perfect.
I really like Column Viewer. I have some data here. You can see I have 31 columns. And sometimes I don't know what I'm getting, and it's an exploratory operation for me. So if I go into Column, go to Column Viewer, and then I just take all of these and go Show Summary. Let's just move this up. Out of the way. There we go. You can see here that I get all of my variables. I get the number, but what I like is to look at the number of missing. How much missing data do I have? Is it important? I look at state, and I immediately, if it wasn't called state, you notice it at 52 categories, and I'd be like, 52? That's too many. And even this one down here at 6, so it allows me to see the level of the categories.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
Maybe there's some I want to condense down, because I've had some data where people get carried away, and I have something like 10 levels. So anyhow, it gives me the number of missing categories, and then I can quickly look across and look at the min-max, the mean and standard deviation, and I can look at the actual quality of the data very quickly. If something catches my eye, like you look here, the number missing is 0, the min, max, and you look at this mean and standard deviation, I could select these two. I can go look at the distribution.
Oh, wow. That's
now I understand this data. It's mostly 0, 1s, and 2s. So it makes a lot of sense.
That's great.
Pete, Column Viewer rocks.
Yeah, I see that. What's the summary statistics down there? Does that the
Oh, no, I
one?
did it twice.
Oh, you did it twice. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't mean to. I got impatient and double-clicked several times. So basically, I can clear the selection. If there's ones here, like I said before, we can do the distribution. And
that's
immediately go in and explore.
I do see why you like this, Mary. I think I'm going to start using Column Viewer more often now. I hadn't seen a need for it, but I guess I didn't know what it fully did. So that's a great little tip. I appreciate it.
No problem. Column Viewer isn't for everybody, Pete, but I shared it with you.
Well, I appreciate it, Mary. And this has been our Jump On Air tip of the day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pete and Mary. And again, if you have suggestions for tips you would like Pete and Mary to act out and show us, make sure you interact with us on the episode page, because they can make us new tips and share new things that Jump can do where a tip is actually the answer. All right, so in our next segment, we have the DOE doctor in a segment called Dear Dr. DOE, where he's going to answer some questions about design of experiments.
Hi, everybody. Before I get started, please, I'm going to encourage you to go over to the segment area of the Jump On Air, and please, I'd love to know what DOE questions you have. Okay, so let's get to the question we have today. Question we have today is discrete numeric the same thing as categorical? Aren't they interchangeable? And while they might look the same, and under the right circumstances, under the right conditions, you can fit equivalent models, they are definitely not the same. In fact, if I force a discrete numeric variable to be categorical, I might be asking for more observations than I really need. Vice versa, if I take a categorical variable and I treat it as discrete numeric, I might have too few resources to get the information that I want. The main underlying difference is the relationship that the variable, the factor, has to my response. With discrete numeric, despite there being discrete groups, discrete levels that I'm looking at, I assume that there's still an underlying continuous relationship. That even though I might not be able to observe values between my levels, they still exist theoretically, and I could still build that relationship. Now, the important aspect about that is I can create a model when I fit to my DOE data. I can create a model that's much more efficient, that might require fewer observations. Okay, so let me demonstrate that. Let me show some of that visually so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to start visually, and I've got the same data. Make it very simple. We're going to look at one factor, and we're going to have 5 levels. And here's the data as if I were to visualize it being continuous. Here I visualize it as being categorical. Again, same data, same levels. On the left-hand side, that's continuous. Think of it maybe as different concentrations that I'm looking at. And on the right-hand side, it's categorical. Think of that as some sort of discrete value, something like shift, maybe supplier, maybe detergent type, and so on. Now, as I'd mentioned, the important aspect about a discrete continuous variable is there's a continuous relationship underlying that. That if I look at the data on the left-hand side, I can say, well, what I have there is a line. And really, knowing a little bit about math, I don't need all 5 of those levels. I can estimate that line with just 2 of the levels. In the case of it, if I were to design this as a DOE, I'd get the high and the low level. So I can take those, even if I design my experiment with those additional levels, I can take those levels that I created, those 2, 3, and 4, and I can repurpose them for something else. So I can take them, for example, to create a better estimate of my experimental noise. So the important thing here is that I don't need, if I make certain assumptions about the underlying relationship between my discrete numeric variable and my response, I don't necessarily need all those observations. Much different in the case on the right. In the case on the right, when I'm dealing with discrete categorical values, I need all 5 of those levels. I lose one of those 5 levels, I've lost information. Okay, now, the nice thing about discrete numeric, as with any numeric variable, is that I don't necessarily have to have a straight line. Again, on the right, I've got categorical variables. I need all 5 levels. On the left, I can probably fit a reasonably good model looking at just 3 of the levels. So again, those of you who've had experience in designing and analyzing experiments knowing, I can fit some curvature by looking at, let's say, a high and a low setting and then something in the middle. So 3 observations. Where I start to have problems, where that discrete numeric starts to benefit from the additional levels, it starts to look more and more like a categorical variable, is when I run into some of these. Think of these as almost as if edge cases. These are when my model, the typical model that I fit with a DOE doesn't work as well. In this first example, I have data that is asymptotic. So sometimes when I have asymptotic data, your typical DOE model might not fit might not fit the data quite as well. However, the nice thing is I can always try. It's from the standpoint of practicality, I don't have to have the right model. I don't have to have the perfect model. I just have to have a model that fits well enough to answer my question. So that's the first case. The second case where I might have potential problems with trying to fit your standard underlying continuous models when I run into some sort of edge condition where I'm falling off a cliff or running into a cliff, and again I've got this this drop off that's very precipitous. Okay, again, this is something that if I were to have designed this as discrete numeric, I can always try to fit that model, and it will fit a model. The other nice benefit is that with discrete numeric, given enough resources, I can always default to what's a categorical equivalent model. All right, so let's do this. Let's actually jump into the custom designer to take a look at discrete numeric and categorical, and let's contrast that with just straight continuous. Okay, this is I think that makes a very nice bridge to show you how are these two concepts linked. All right, so here I've got my continuous. We'll stick that in the back. Here I've got my categorical variable and my discrete numeric variable. Let me go ahead and click the continue button. A couple of things that you might notice is one is that with discrete numeric, I get a lot more components to the model. I've got a squared term, I've got a cubic, and a power to the fourth term in the model. Okay, you'll also notice that I've got fewer runs than I have in the case of the categorical. In the case of the categorical, I only have one factor, but there are 5 implicit levels there. So, as you see right off the bat, that not only the minimum number of runs, but the default number of runs are much smaller for the discrete numeric. Now, this gets back to what I showed you earlier. By default, in the case of a discrete numeric variable, all I really need to have on the extreme is some measure of my intercept, some measure of my slope. All right, so those are the two. So I'll need 2 points at a minimum to measure that line, to get the slope of that line. If I ask for more, I'll be able to get some of those additional, if possible, factors into my model. With the categorical, I'm out of luck. I need to have at least 5 observations, preferably more, to be able to get some estimate of error. All right, so let me relate that back to the continuous case. This is not discrete numeric, it's just a continuous variable. How does this relate? How does this tie these two concepts together? So what I'm going to do with the discrete numeric, with the continuous, is I'm going to build the same model that we saw in discrete numeric. I'm going to add a squared term. I'm going to add a tertiary and a power to the fourth term. When I do that, you'll notice that what I have is models or DOEs that give me models that are requiring the same resources. This is when I said earlier that I can fit. These are not exactly, if I were to fit my data to these two models, I would get different but equivalent models. Okay, so this kind of underlies, I'm really looking at the same information. I'm looking at the information in slightly different ways. Now, how does this relate back to discrete numeric variables? So if you remember with the discrete numeric, 3 of those effects that I put in the model were considered as if possible. So again, if I were to just right click and say if possible, now I'm back to my discrete numeric variable. Okay, so that's the relationship and going from something that's discrete numeric and categorical and relating the two with one another. Okay, so let me clean up my space a bit. So why would I bother with discrete numeric in the first place? Well, we've seen one potential use of discrete numeric, and that is the case where I hope the data is fairly well behaved, that it's linear or maybe has some curvature, but I'm not really sure if I've come to the edge. So I want to have those additional data points in there just in case. There's another case, and this is I think this is a really nice result of why discrete numeric variables are in there. From the standpoint, from a historical standpoint, discrete numeric was put in there. One of the reasons discrete numeric was put into the DOE platform back in JMP version 10 was because the way you would get that third level and additional levels into a design is you would put a square term or a cubic term in the model. And unless you were a mathematician or a statistician or you had a lot of experience with DOE, you might not have realized that. So in version 10, the discrete numeric variable was added so that people can say, well, I want a third level, I want a fourth level, or additional levels in my design, and give them to me if possible. Now, one of the nice things, one of the nice results of having discrete numeric is that prior to JMP version 10, before discrete numeric, when I asked for that, let's say third level, it would always put it in the center of my design. And the reason it would do that is that the custom designers, based on optimality criteria, and if I were to ask for a set of variables, a set of factors, if I were to ask for a third level, the optimal place to put that is right in the center of the design. Well, what happens when I can't run that observation at the center of my design? Or what if my standard conditions, the conditions I want to test against, were slightly off-centered? How would I get that data point into my model? And from JMP version 10 on, the answer is I use discrete numeric. All right. So I've got a design that I have started. So let me pull that up. All right. Let me go to my custom designer. So here's my custom design. We're going to keep this simple, but this extends to as many discrete numeric variables if you want. I can include categorical and continuous variables in here, but we're going to focus on using this to get a not so center point. So I've got two variables. I've got A and B. They're both discrete numeric. I want to run A in 3 different levels, and I want to run B in 4 levels. And to make things simple and to relate them back to sort of a standard design, we're going to assume that the high and the low settings for A and B are in their standard units, -1 for the low and 1 for the high value. However, I want to assume that when I run A and B, I don't necessarily run it at the center. I don't run it at 0, 0. My standard operating conditions are to run it at A equals 0.25 and B equal to 0.5. So the way I do that is I can specify those values in my design. In addition, I might want to run, let's say, a point at B equals 0 as well. So the flexibility, the great thing about the discrete numeric is I can do that. I can set those values to wherever I can run or wherever I would like to run my experiment. All right. Now, if I were to, I'm just going to stick with the defaults in terms of the model. I'm going to increase the number of runs just so I can cover my design, my space a little bit better. So what I wind up getting in those cases is, you'll notice that if I were to ask for A at 3 levels, B at 4 levels, given those factor settings, I would have this kind of design. Again, my idea here is that this is typically, I might be running my standard operating conditions somewhere around here, but I can fill that space however I would like to. Okay, so probably a good place to take a break. Ask, are there any questions? If there are any questions, I'm not seeing any on the Q&A window, but certainly I've got about 5 minutes left. I would make sure if you've got questions, please ask them. You always have the opportunity to go to the segment area on the JMP community if you have questions after the episode or if you have some additional questions.
Don, would you like a 2-minute hold for everyone to ask some questions for us?
Sure, let's do that.
Great. Back to you, Don.
Okay, thank you, Julian. I've got a couple of questions. So let me start with the first one, and that's to summarize the relationship, the difference between regular continuous and discrete numeric. And the way I like to think of it is discrete numeric is a special case of continuous, where I am forced to run my design at particular levels because I mean that's all that's available, or it's all I have time or the resources to run. As it turns out, I can always take that continuous variable and I can set up my model in such a way to get what the discrete numeric would have given me. The discrete numeric is an easier way to do it. It sets up a lot of the things I would have otherwise had to do by hand. So really, again, discrete numeric is a special case of continuous. Second question, I'm probably going to we'll have to take that offline. Do I avoid trials based on typical DOE designs? I'm not really exactly sure what you mean by avoiding trials. And the example that they gave was Box-Benken designs. Now, I mean, that certainly will take us far afield. Maybe that's a good next episode is what do I have when I've got restrictions on my design space? What if I can't run at a particular corner, or I have certain combinations that don't work? But certainly, I want to encourage that person to, hunt me out in the community. And if you can add a little bit more in terms of what you mean by avoiding trials. Do I have examples of a completed design and analysis using the concept? I do, but it would take me far too long to find it and to show it here. It happens a lot. The situation I remember in the past where I could have used something like this is where I had a very nonlinear response in the sense that we were looking at X-ray damage relative to for ICs relative to the amount of dosing, and it was a very asymptotic. So I probably would have used the discrete numeric to find out where is kind of the bend in the hockey stick there. I'd want to know where. So it was with a case where one dose caused some damage and two was just absolutely too much for everything. So it would have been nice to be able to space those out using something like discrete numeric. Okay. Some statisticians say they prefer categorical over discrete numeric and jump. Categorical is different than discrete numeric. Categorical, I can't get in between the levels. They're not defined. Discrete numeric, I'm making the relationship. I'm believing that there's a continuous relationship between those discrete numeric variables and my response or my responses. So there really are two different, slightly different, but importantly different animals. Okay, it looks like I'm at the top of the hour. I don't want to. I want to leave folks, the next person, enough time. So I'm going to have to take it back to you, Julian.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Don. And yeah, do connect with Don in the user community in the episode page for his segments. Because yeah, we always want to hear more about the questions you have. Because we'll have Dr. DOE back on, and hopefully he'll play guitar for us at one of these times. Thanks so much, Don. In our next segment, we're going to hear about a special resource we have, Statistical Thinking for Industrial Problem Solving.
Hi. So in today's Resources Spotlight, we talk about the course Statistical Thinking for Industrial Problem Solving. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we call it STIPS. I'm Damien Carville. I'm a sales manager here at JMP, and today I'm talking with Mia Stevens, JMP product manager and the development lead for the STIPS course. Now at JMP, we are continually finding interesting ways to educate and inform our customers about how to use our software for innovation. But we've never had anything like STIPS before. So Mia, can you please tell us a little bit about STIPS, who it was designed for, and what's included in the course?
Sure, thank you. And by the way, this is Minnie, this character. She helps teach the course. So STIPS is our free online statistics course. It is self-paced. It takes about 25 to 30 hours to complete. And it's available to anyone, anywhere who wants to learn how to solve problems using data and statistics. All you need is a mobile device or a computer or laptop and an internet connection. The course is structured in 7 standalone modules. And each module has a series of lessons that are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So there are short instructional videos. These are usually 3 to 5 minutes. There are questions. If you're following along in JMP and want to learn how to do things in JMP, there are JMP demonstration videos. And then there's also practice exercises. And you can follow along if you have your own version of JMP, or if you don't have a copy of JMP, then you can use JMP that's provided through the course. At the end of each module, you can take a quiz that's 10 questions and earn a badge of completion, and you can share these in social media or via email. Or if you complete the entire course, you can take a certification exam. And right now the course is available in English, but we're translating it into Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, and we're working on making the course available in Coursera.
Great, wow. So I believe you got some slides to share as well, so if you could pop those up.
I thought I was sharing the slides.
Yeah, they don't seem to be on right now that I can see.
Okay, I thought I was sharing them.
So I don't see those, Julian.
Well, how about we keep going?
Yeah, sure. So what you've just described is extremely comprehensive. Can you tell us why we created STIPS and then how you and the team went about creating such depth of content?
Sure. And are you seeing my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so STIPS came out of conversations with faculty members teaching statistics, teaching in engineering programs, and out of conversations with industry experts. And we learned that many engineering programs don't have the capacity to teach applied statistics. And many students are entering the workforce without the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to use data and use statistical methods to solve problems. So many companies are burdened to provide this training, or students and young professionals are required to actually backfill and take courses on their own. So when we first thought of developing a course, we wanted to provide a course that is broadly available and is localized in different languages, that is specifically geared to the needs of engineers and scientists, and that's guided by industry and by the needs of people within industry. And we also wanted a course that provides a pathway to certification. So our first step, or one of our first steps, was to conduct a survey to understand better what the needs of industry is. So we asked questions like, what types of problems are you trying to solve? What kinds of challenges do you face in using data? What kinds of methods do you use? And we mined these data and we identified several groupings, and there's some core topics that were really, really important. And we used this information to determine the structure of the course. So there are 7 modules, and they start with basic thinking about your problem, thinking about the process that you're trying to improve, how to work with data, how to characterize the variability in your process, and goes all the way through to design of experiments and predictive modeling, text mining. So it's fairly comprehensive.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So at this point, I think for the sake of full disclosure, I should make an admission. And you know this, Mia, but I am an absolute STIPS groupie. So I followed along as the team was progressing the development. I signed up on the day it was launched. I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to pass the certification towards the end of last year. And it's definitely among the most useful and practical training courses I've ever taken, no doubt about it. But I'm a sample size of just one, an important sample size in my world, but I'm a sample size of one. So apart from me, how has the response been? Have a lot of people taken the course?
Yeah, the response has really been overwhelming. We released our first module in October of 2018, and since that time, we've had more than 12,000 enrollments worldwide. And we're getting enrollments from the United States, but also pretty much across the globe. So the response has been fantastic. The feedback's been great. And with this new era of working from home, many users are trying to find opportunities for growth and education. Our average enrollments before working from home was around 30 or 40 per day, and we've seen that multiply. So we're up around 120 new enrollments per day. So that's
Wow.
a pretty good sign that we're doing something right.
For sure, sure. You know, none of this is a surprise to me. Speaking to customers about STIPS, the feedback that we get on the sales side has been relentlessly positive. You know, we've got examples of some groups who set up weekly lunch and learn sessions to go through modules together. We've had several large multinational organizations looking into using STIPS as their foundational statistics, applied statistics training across the enterprise. It's been amazing. So if I'm a user who wants to enroll today for my own benefit, or even take a look to see and evaluate if this is something I'd like to roll out across my department, how would I do that?
Well, it's actually really easy. We have a web page, jump.com/statistical thinking. There's also a panel on the homepage at jump.com. Our website talks about the course, describes the content within each of the modules, talks about the certification, and there's a big Enroll Now button. And all you need is a SAS profile. And once you hit Enroll Now into your profile, you're in the course. And by the way, if you don't have your own version of JMP, JMP does run in the virtual lab in the course. So if you're interested in following along, it's not a JMP course per se, but if you're interested in following along a JMP, you can use JMP in the virtual lab.
Wow, that's great, Mia. Thank you so much. So there you have it. Today's resource spotlight, the free online course, Statistical Thinking for Industrial Problem Solving, or STIPS. Back to you, Julian.
Fantastic. Thank you both for sharing that. STIPS is really a great course, and we really hope you find it and love it and share it with others as well. In our next segment, we're going to hear from Nick Sheldon, who's going to talk to us about a great question, which is, so you want to become a data scientist?
Great. All right, let me just share my screen here. All right, the field of data science. I'm sure everyone has heard the term data science, data scientist, once, twice, maybe 1,000 times, and you're thinking, how can I get a piece of this action? A lot of exciting things happening right now in this up and coming field, and maybe for where you are right now in your career, you're thinking that this is a next stepping stone for you. So let's talk about in this segment how you can make that transition into this new field. Let's begin by talking about what exactly is data science. If you look up the traditional definition, most likely you'll see something that references a multidisciplinary field. Data science is the combination of statistics, math, and computer science. We take those 3 fields, we combine that with additional scientific methods, processes, systems. We use all that to extract knowledge from data. That's all just really a lot of words to say simply that we take data, we turn it to important insight. And that insight is extremely valuable, right? Just like what we're seeing in this cartoon, that insight that we get from data is just as valuable as gold, if not even more. And corporations tend to agree with that. According to Forbes, this year in 2020, the demand for data scientists will increase by 28%. That works out to be about 700,000 openings. So there's a lot of opportunity out there in the marketplace. With that opportunity, also know that you'll get a healthy salary. The average salary for a data scientist is $113,000. Not too bad. And all these things put together have some saying simply that it's just the best job in America right now. So hopefully that excites everyone and gives some reason to explore this field a little bit further. So let's talk a little bit about my journey. How did I do it? So I started my journey in the semiconductor industry. My background's in engineering, and I worked for a semiconductor manufacturer where I was responsible for what was happening in production. And my job encompassed many different things. Sometimes I would develop hardware, sometimes I would write software, sometimes I would speak with customers and work on different quality issues and things like that. And data science, data analysis was maybe only about 10% of my job. And but that would change very quickly, and it would change largely related to what we're seeing in this image. This is a clean room, and this is where I would have to do a lot of my work. And I did not like going into the clean room. It was just a very long process. Anytime you had to go in there, the facility, I had to drive my car to the facility. I had to go through multiple security checkpoints. I had to get gowned up, just like how all these people in this image are depicted. And it was a very noisy environment. I just did not like going in there. And one of the things that I noticed was that there weren't too many senior level engineers there. There's a lot of junior engineers working in the clean room. And it wasn't because it was one of those things where the senior engineers kind of handed down the tasks and things that they didn't want to do to the junior members on the team. There was something else that was going on. And I reached out to a senior member, and I just kind of, shared with him that observation that I had, and we were discussing it. And he said to me he knew exactly what was going on. How I was working is I was being very hands-on. I was going into the clean room and I was trying to solve the problems in the room from a very hands-on, experimental type of way to work. Whereas what he was doing was he was looking at the data. He was performing data analysis. He was pulling out trends, and he already knew the answer before going into the clean room. And he was only going in the room to really confirm what he knew. And hearing that completely changed my perspective of data science and analysis. And from that point, I made a great effort to learn as much as I can about analytics, about extracting insights from data, and I increased the amount of how important data science was in my job. Initially, it was 10%. That quickly grew to 30%, 40, and 50%. I sought out opportunities where I could continue to work on different projects to continue my learning. And ultimately, I transitioned to my role here at JMP, where I work every day with engineers and scientists to share with them best practices for how they can extract better insights out of their data. So that was my journey. Let's talk a little bit now about how you can make your transition into the field. The fundamentals. So you have to have some understanding of how to do the job. And so what I'm showing here is the data science life cycle. This represents typical steps that we take in answering a problem from a data science perspective. And I want to thank my fellow JMP data scientists, Alexa, for sharing this graph with us, because this really does a good job at speaking to the areas that you need to address in solving these problems. Now, there's a lot of things to learn, but there's some good news. The first element on this graph is actually something that we already have. You already know something. You already have some background information about something. In my experience, my background is engineering, so I understand engineering problems very well. So if I'm going to make a transition to the data science, then it's a natural transition to progress into a role that will leverage my engineering background. And that first piece, that business understanding, is what actually creates the questions that drive the analysis. So highly recommend that that's where you begin your career, in a field where you already have that domain expertise. Step number 2 is the data mining. And data mining is a term that sometimes could be used in different contexts, but in this context, we're talking about the steps that we need to compile the information and gather the information. How are you going to do that? How are you going to join data sets, bring in information from this repository to the next? No data analysis can be done without data, so being able to do this is a critical part of the cycle. And this is very much a cycle. Data analysis never really ends. We start with questions, we find answers to those questions, those answers lead to new questions, and we really just repeat the cycle over and over again. Step number 3, the data cleanup process. Inevitably, after we've aggregated the data is not going to be perfect. We need to be familiar with how are we going to address that. What are we going to do if we see outliers? What techniques can we use if we have missing data versus which particular methods and analyses might we not be able to use if we have missing values? So some understanding of some best practices and generally what's done in that respect is required. Number 4, data exploration. This directly relates to hypotheses. We started our analysis with some questions. Because we have that domain expertise, we probably already have a general idea of what might be some answers to those questions that we have. How are we going to quickly verify that? Are we going to do this from a statistical perspective? And if so, what statistics are we going to use? If we're going to do this from a visual perspective, then how are we going to produce those visualizations? So these are some of the things that you should think about as you build your understanding of data exploration. Step number 5, the feature engineering. How can we extract out those important, critical variables in the data set? How might we be able to recalculate values, maybe reposition the data in order to answer the questions that we're trying to find solutions for, right? Number 6, predictive modeling. This is a critical piece. Models are very useful for us in data science. It allows us to determine which variables are important, allows us to understand what's going to happen under different scenarios. And if we know all that, then we can really optimize things and really improve processes. And there's a lot of different types of predictive models out there. And so understanding what's available and the advantages and disadvantages of different techniques is something that will be extremely useful in being a very good data scientist. And the last step, number 7, data visualization. At the end of the process, once we've found the answer to the question, we are going to, of course, have to share this with people. And so being able to create a visualization that really describes the answer is a critical component. What's not specifically mentioned here, though, is also presentation skills. It will not be sufficient to simply just send a graph to your manager of your analysis. Most likely, they're going to have questions and want you to present that material. So having that confidence and being able to speak in front of others is something else that will make you a very good data scientist. My recommendation is to attempt to fill in these pieces of the pie as best as you can to formulate your understanding of what you would do to address each one of these components, and then take a second spin at refining your skills. And when you do the second pass, what I recommend is you do some searches on the internet to find your ideal job posting. And you look specifically at what skills are referenced. If they say that, for example, maybe you really want to be a data scientist at Amazon, And if they say in the job description that there's a requirement for you to be familiar with accessing databases and Amazon Web Services, then you know that that's an area where you might want to prove your understanding if you're really serious about working at that employer. So now that we've kind of discussed what you need to learn to be a data scientist, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to learn all these skills. We have two approaches that we can take. We can either do a self-taught approach, which is going to rely heavily on books and other online resources, or we can take an instructor-led approach that being done via the web or in person in a classroom. Me personally, I don't really think there's one or the other is better. I think actually because data science is a relatively new field that employers, unlike other types of jobs, employers don't necessarily expect for you to have a bachelor's degree in data science. There's very few institutions that actually offer that. What they tend to expect is that you have some domain expertise and you've done something along the way to just augment your understanding of data science. And how you've done that, whether you've taken a self-taught approach or an instructor-led approach, is really something that they're leaving up to the candidate to decide. So what I will offer is maybe just some points to consider as you make some decisions as far as what path you might want to take. If you're going down the self-taught approach, this is generally something that I would recommend for somebody who already has quite a high level of prior knowledge. Maybe you've already done some previous statistics courses or things like that, and maybe what you need is just a refresher, or maybe to just understand what are some of the more common techniques that are being used in the marketplace. Then that might be something, the path for you. Self-taught approach is obviously a lot less in terms of financial investment. There's a lot of great resources for free, if not for very little money. At the end of the presentation, I'll share some resources that you can leverage to learn a little bit more about some of these techniques. Because you're working by yourself, it's really up to you to set the pace. So if today you feel like reading one chapter, then you can do that. And if tomorrow you have something else on your agenda, you don't have the time, then that's fine. You really have ultimate flexibility for how much you're going to learn. Self-taught approach also offers quite a big variety. There are so many different books and resources out there. One thing that I like to do personally is to read different articles that explain the same topic to get everyone's perspective. Maybe the first time you read about a particular technique, you don't fully understand all the intricacies. And maybe when you read that second article, you start to connect all the dots. And so when you take that self-taught approach, you obviously have a greater variety compared to what's going to happen in an instructor-led course. Some things to consider in an instructor-led course is maybe if you don't have a strong background, you might prefer to go down that path. You're obviously, in terms of investments, going to be a little bit greater. It's a lot more hands-on, and you do have that whole ability to ask questions, which is critical. If you're sitting in a class and the instructor is going over the benefits of performing discriminant analysis, and you don't quite understand that, you have the luxury of being able to raise your hand and say, excuse me, can you repeat that? Because I didn't quite understand everything that you just shared. Whereas if you went down the self-taught approach, that's not going to be an option. So just a couple of things to consider as you decide which path might be best for you as you learn some of these necessary data science skills. One of the things that we haven't discussed explicitly here is actually a critical piece, which is how are you actually going to prove that you know these things? It's pretty easy to prove when you take that instructor-led approach. Most often you're going to get a certificate, or if you did some formal education, that's going to lead to a degree, and pretty easy to prove to somebody that you actually understand the concepts if you've gone down that route. If you have gone down the self-taught route, you can still, of course, prove that you've understood the concepts. It will just involve maybe some additional steps. At JMP and also at SAS, we offer different accreditations, so you can take an exam to prove that you understand concepts and get accredited for different statistical methods and things like that. Most vendors offer options like that. You can also, if you're looking for something more generic, get accredited as a certified analytics professional. That's something else that's pretty popular in the data science community. You can also go back to your ideal job. Look at the job posting, see what is explicitly listed in that job posting. You want to work at Amazon, and if they say that you have to have a master's degree in an analytics field, then that will allow you to understand a little bit more in terms of what different learning method you should take if you are serious about pursuing a job with that particular employer. So let's just recap really quick. So we've talked about what to learn it, how to prove it. We're almost ready at the point where we can start applying for jobs, but we need to consider one more thing, and that is the experience. And I kind of like to think of this as the chicken and egg problem, because it's like you want a job in data science, but you can't get a job in data science because you need to have experience working as a data scientist, but you can't get that unless you have a job in data science. So it's kind of a little bit of a conundrum. And in my experience, the best way to deal with this is really to just create your own experience yourself. Just like I did when I started out early in my career, I sought out those data-rich assignments. So you can do that if you're currently working right now internally in your organization. Seek out for those opportunities that are going to allow you to showcase how strong of a data analysis you are. And then, of course, you can speak to those in your resume. Seek for opportunities to present at conferences. Sometimes those look very well in the eyes of different employers. There's a few things that I've listed here in the consideration of time. Maybe I'll just speak to one more thing that I have here called the passion project. So find some data that you're really interested in. Where I live, we have these open data websites. So the cities publish public data sets. Download one of those public data sets, do some analysis, and then share it on social media, right? That might lead to new connections and new opportunities, and then speak to all those things on your resume. You can use all that as experience. You don't necessarily need that prior job working as a data scientist to demonstrate that you've actually done these skills before. Okay, so we've talked about experience, and now we're ready to find a job. So where are we going to find our job? Most jobs are found by networking, and that's no different here in the field of data science. So that's obviously very important. I recommend that you always network and meet as many people as possible. Some more specific things you can do is get involved with your local data science community. Many regions have these data science meetups where you can present, you can showcase what you've done, you can connect with other people who are working in industry. A lot of these meetups are also sponsored by organizations who are actually hiring data scientists. So you never know who's in the audience. You could do a presentation, and there might very well be somebody there who's looking to hire somebody with your particular skill set. Conferences are a good place as well. A nice thing about a conference, especially the career fairs, is that you have the opportunity to speak face-to-face with a hiring manager. So if your work experience maybe is not that well and it doesn't really tell the full picture on your resume, that's an opportunity where you can get in front of your hiring manager and really showcase all the things that you really know about data science. LinkedIn is also a great resource, not just because of the job postings, but if you share all the great things that you're working on and you do it correctly, then these jobs will actually come and find you. All right, now let's be realistic here. How long will this whole thing take? Well, there's really no guaranteed answer. Everyone's transition and journey will be slightly different. What I can say is to be patient and be realistic. For sure, there are going to be obstacles and challenges, If you're serious about entering this field, and I'm very confident that if you keep working towards it, expand your learning, that you will find the right opportunity for you. If you feel that you are continually hitting obstacles, another thing that you can consider is to maybe make a smaller jump. So rather than making that big jump from going from pure chemist to full data scientist, maybe you make a transition in between where you take a chemist job that just offers maybe more opportunities to perform data analysis. All right, so we're coming close to the end. So I will share these slides with everyone in the community, where I have listed some great resources where you can learn more about how to become a data scientist, how to improve your skills. Looking forward to hearing from everyone. If you guys have experienced particular challenges, maybe you have something else that you've kind of, that you would like to share as you have been trying to make this transition into this exciting world, then please leave your comments in the community page. All right, well, I hope the process is maybe a little bit clear for everyone now, and I wish everyone success if you're trying to make a transition to the wonderful world of data science. All right, Julian, back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nick. And yeah, again, we'll have all those materials shared with everyone in the user community in the episode page for Nick's episode. Thanks again, Nick, for being willing to participate. In our next show, did you know Kevin's going to take us through visualization tips to show hidden features in your data?
Okay, hello, Julian. Thanks very much. I'm just checking audio. You can hear me well?
I can hear you. Can't see you yet, but
yeah, I'm going to actually show an analysis in JMP, so there'll be no video. There'll be just me doing some analyses. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I know there's quite a bit of things we're all having to adjust to, so appreciate taking time to participate in this. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show an analysis of this data set that I've been playing with to hopefully give you some ideas and some creative ways to look at data. In fact, this one's somewhat relevant because you'll see it's a technique that is kind of makes sense a lot because a lot of these graphs are coming out now. So this happens to be a data set from an entomologist who has been studying.
And we're not seeing, sorry, Kevin, to interrupt you. We're not seeing your screen in case you're thinking you're sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Let me switch over. I think this will be.
There we go. Now we can see it. Sorry about that.
No problem. So this happens to be a data set that this entomologist has been working with, studying the population of this particular type of grasshopper across different locations in Alberta, Canada. So just to show you what I mean by that is, here's a little map. I know it's zoomed in a little bit, but that's Alberta, Canada, and every one of those dots is one of the locations that this team is sort of has been tracking the density, the population of this grasshopper. And so first thing I always do with the data set is let me just see what kind of values I have here. It's easier than scrolling through. So I'm just going to just show a visualization of sort of just summarizing the data. So you can see, for example, we have 74 different locations that we're measuring. And the first thing you'll notice is it's not all equal, right? So some locations got measured more frequently than others. We have data going all the way back to 1970. But you can see that we don't have the equal amounts of data collected every year. So different locations, came along later. So we can kind of see that there. And then this last graph is just a histogram of the density, across all those measured values we have. Okay. So a common thing people think of is, well, if you have something over time, let's look at some time series graphs. Well, here's the problem with this. There's so many locations that if we just threw them all up on one map, it just becomes too crowded, right? You can't really see the patterns, even though there are some things you can see. So for example, this area in the early 2000s, you can kind of see there's a general increase, but still way too messy to get a sense of that. So then you might think, well, maybe let me look at it individually. And I can certainly do that, looking at every county, but this becomes difficult too. And then, some locations we only have 2 years or a few years, and others we have more. So again, kind of difficult. Since we have locations in a map, how about this as a way to sort of show what's happening? So there's a dot for each location that the measurements are made, and the size of the dot is the density of those grasshoppers. Well, because we have these interactive tools in JMP, dynamic ways to visualize, I can sort of just have it move through the years, and now I can kind of watch that pattern happening. But I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. And right here is we'll see when it hits the 2000s, you'll watch a big bloom of the population. See right there? So not only do I get to see how that population is changing dynamically, but I can see how it's getting measured across different locations. So again, a very, very simple technique. In fact, you're probably, when you watch the news, you're seeing tons of graphs like this now showing visualizations on a map, because obviously we're tracking the coronavirus and incidence of it, and you're watching things like bubble size or colors, but it's so much more engaging and interesting to look at it in a map versus just plotting the raw data in a time series graph or something of that sort. So again, I have a short little 5-minute session. So hopefully you learned a little technique and it'll improve the way you look at data.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us. And yeah, there'll be more episodes of Did You Know, which cover these short topics, showing us interesting things in JMP, statistics, science, and of course, data. Our next segment is Mike Anderson back to tell us about more things. In this one, he's going to be exploring Text Explorer with us.
Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Anderson. I'm a systems engineer for New York. And today I'm going to be showing you a few of the things that I love about Text Explorer. And I got really passionate about this particular tool back when it was first introduced. And it's been kind of a hobby for me to kind of go around with it and play with Text Explorer a little bit. For the sake of argument here, I'm going to use some data that I've never used before. I was working on this over the weekend trying to pull this data set together. And this is being stuck at home like everybody else. I've been going through some of my old favorite TV shows. One of those back in grad school was Futurama. So I've pulled all of the plot summaries from Wikipedia for all of the Futurama episodes. And that's what we're going to be analyzing today. Now, before we go into this in too much detail, let me give you a little bit of an idea about what Text Explorer is for. And it all lines up in that last name. In JMP, there are two platforms that are called explorers. There is Text Explorer and there's Functional Data Explorer. These platforms, while they can do an analysis among themselves, one of their primary features is to transform data from one usually tricky format to analyze into something that's easier to work with in JMP. So that said, while we can do some very interesting things in the Text Explorer, one of the things that I love about it is its ability to transform text data into something that I can do sentiment analysis with. And there's some resources on that. I'm not going to go down that road. That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But one of the things that I love about Text Explorer is that facility to take text, which is challenging to analyze in a statistical package, to something that we can analyze, that we can model, that we can crunch in a little bit more in a more comfortable setting. So let's go ahead and let's get started with this. And I'm going to show you first how to get the platform set up. So we'll go into Analyze Text Explorer. And it's as simple as dropping in the free text that you've got in your data set. So Text Explorer we go into there first. We have a bunch of options that we can use to filter down the data. We can get rid of really, really short words. We can work with phrases and things like that as well. There's a great tutorial by Nick Shelton on how to do all of the basics that's out on the web. So I'm going to skip over that just for a second and get to kind of the highlight reel of the things I love about Text Explorer in general. The first thing that I love is the word cloud. Okay, this is when people talk about text analysis, this is the first thing that pops to mind. It can be impactful. It can be incredibly powerful. It's a great tool for visualizing this data, and it makes it kind of easy for people to consume. In this case, the first thing we see out of the gate, we see the main characters. We see Philip J. Fry, we see Bender, we see Leela. We see these main characters that are in almost every episode, so it's not surprising that they are going to that they're going to show up a lot in the plot summaries. Now, removing that information is really easy. I can right-click on something and say, add a stop word, and that excludes that word from analysis. If I do that with by removing just these three, just Fry, Bender, and Leela, I get up to something where I can start picking out different themes that are present within the data set. Now, I've colored this based on the overall Internet Movie Database rating for the individual episodes. And you can see that in some cases, things that involve Farnsworth or involve robots, you can see that those tend to be a little bit lower on the rating scales than things that involve the professors or, for instance, time travel or something like that, some of the more kind of out there sci-fi type topics that are associated with this show. And that brings me to the next thing that I love about this that I love about this platform. And this is a pro capability. But what I love is the ability to come into, after I've gotten rid of the words that don't necessarily matter, once I've got the data set curated, I can come in and say, do something called latent semantic analysis. And that's a lot of words to say. We're going to analyze all of these terms that we've looked at and turn them into things that maybe we can look at for trends or phrases and words that tend to show up together. And that's what we've got down here. Now, in this case, we don't see a lot. That's good. Futurama as a show was kind of all over the place. There was no real formulaic element to it in terms of the different plot elements that it had into it. So expecting to see a lot of interesting things in here wasn't something I was looking for. What I was curious about was how the topic analysis, which is one of the options for under SVD, would be able to handle this kind of data. And what it does in this case is it starts picking out individual episodes, not by picking them out based on on the row of information, but just based on the words and phrases that tend to show up together. It starts reconstructing the synopses for different episodes. And that's kind of a good idea for what topics are in this case. They're not necessarily topics; they're words and phrases that show up together very frequently, and you can use that with your own personal insight, with your subject matter expertise, to read into that and start figuring out things that are important within this data set. Now, let me show you one where we've got some common themes that tend to show up a lot within a data set. This is the same type of analysis. This is actually one of the sample data sets in JMP, and it is looking at survey of pets. And what we can see here is this top plot now actually has some structure to it, has some things that are interesting to it. And the way I explain this to people is each one of these kind of tendrils that goes off along each side. You can see there's 3 of them here. And you can see 3, 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 over here. 3 or 4 different topics, or 3 or 4 different common sets of documents that show up within the data set. And this helps you when you're looking at data where you're looking for commonality, when you're looking for common themes that show up within a data set, like survey analysis, or when you're analyzing reviews from products, or when you're looking at your social media. Those kind of common threads and themes can provide insight for you, and we can come in and just grab them really quickly. Here I'm using the lasso tool, and I can pull up the text, and I can look in here and I can see what's going on. Aside from the itinerant cat entry here, there's a couple of them. This thread is talking about guard dogs. And we can get that just from the different terms that tend to show up together within the data set. And that's the crux of the things that I like about this platform. The ability to visualize a very challenging data set, the word cloud. The ability to take and dig into that data set for different themes or trends that you may not know are there. And the third is its ability, as I said at first, to transform data from one form to another to let us do things like sentiment analysis and things like that. The way we do that in this case is we come up to the red triangle and we come down to where it says Save Document Term Matrix. And what that will do is it will take all of the terms that we've taken in our data set and create columns of within the original data set for each of those terms. And those become the factors that we use when we're building a model for instance, sentiment analysis. And this is a bit of a high level overview. There are some great tools for working with sentiment and working with Text Explorer out there on the web. There's 2 Mastering JMP seminars already recorded. You can go and look at those today. Those links are going to be in the community page for this episode of JMP On Air. Julian, I'll take it back to you now.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Mike. I'm glad you showed Futurama. That's actually one of my favorite shows. So I loved seeing those data there. And if you all like Text Explorer on this episode, you can tune in next week too. We have a presenter who's going to be actually sharing Text Explorer with works of classical literature. And it's going to be actually a guessing game. So we hope you join us for that episode. Our next program is another Have You Tried, where Ryan's going to take us through the new user welcome kit. Ryan?
Hello, everyone. I wanted to take you through the new user welcome kit. I created this kit maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and the kit has evolved with new content because JMP has evolved itself, and I wanted to walk you through. The first thing you're going to want to do, if you've never taken the kit before, is you're going to want to head to jmp.com/welcome to register for the kit. Once you're there, fill out the registration form and you immediately get access to the kit. You also receive an email for that kit. Okay, once you're at the kit, the first thing you're going to want to do is type in your name, and this is used only for the certificate. I want my name to be on my certificate so I can proudly print this up and show my colleagues that I finished the new user welcome kit on my door. Maybe it could be a little bit of competition, but that will go on the certificate and also will kind of indicate your name throughout the certificate, but this information is not shared. I'm going to select start, but before I do, I want to kind of talk about the interface. The JMP new user welcome kit has 6 different sections that walk you through with videos and activities that you have to do in JMP that are basically covering the basics of JMP. We start everything from launching the application on the left over here, all the way to analyzing data using a fit model, using fit y by x, comparing 2 variables, comparing multiple variables, and then also sharing whether or not you're exporting, going to PowerPoint, or JMP Public or JMP Live. You can share that data with your other colleagues. So every time that you finish the section, you get a green little check mark. So once we're ready to go, we're going to go ahead and select start. Okay, the first video that we come across is the basic parts of JMP. In this quick video, I'm not going to be going through the entire kit in its entirety. That's kind of a odd way of saying that. I'm going to be covering the basics, but this first video is what JMP is about from a brand new perspective. Maybe you've used JMP, but you've only used one platform. I go through a JMP journal that has 10 foundational parts of JMP. I cover everything from the tools on the top banner to the menu items, all types of things like that. Data tables, launching windows, things like that. I cover this in this very short video. The next thing that we're going to want to do in the first launch section is do a simple distribution. For that, we're going to use probably the most popular database or sample data table, and that is big class. By the way, I show you how to use sample data, the 2 ways that you can access it within JMP throughout this kit. So I'm going through just the first videos in the first launch section. Right-clicking If you want to learn about new things about jump, you got to right click. So this video I dedicated to right clicking because I'm always right clicking, and I think most people are in jump. There's tons of opportunities, lots of buried treasure by right clicking in addition to the red triangle. So I'm covering all the places that you can right click inside of jump. And then after you're done with that, there is a knowledge check. Cover your eyes. I've known the answer because I've done this kit maybe 200 times. Is you have to go into jump and use what you're learning. This one here, I had to open up the candy bar sample data. Where can you find that candy bar sample data? You can find that under the help menu, but also I have put all of the data right here inside of the resources panel so that you can access any of the data that's used. Okay, so now that I got that correct, I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. That will go on to the next video, which is basic data workflow. In this video here, it's kind of a really important one. It talks about all the ways that you can get data inside of JMP and then how you can actually process it or prep it to do an analysis. So that is extremely important. In JMP projects, a video is in the first section because if you want to contain all of your files, whether or not they're scripts or if they're data tables, you're going to want to use a JMP project. So I cover that because if I were to start all over again with JMP, I would use a project for about anything, especially with where they're at right now, and some really exciting things are coming for JMP projects in the future. Again, we're going to be doing another knowledge check, just going quickly through the first section. Oh, cover your eyes. I knew the answer there. And there we go. I get a green check mark. And now I can go through each one of the sections. And going through each of the sections is importing there. I'm now going through the data prep. That covers a lot of really critical things about prepping your data before an analysis. So I'm just kind of getting you to the certificate part. So for graphing, I cover Graph Builder, all the different great things about Graph Builder. If you have not used Graph Builder a lot, you may want to learn about some of the new elements that are in the Graph Builder platform. I'm covering that in the Graph Builder section. For Analyze, you actually learn how to do an analysis. You learn how to do a fit model, or if you learn how to do a fit Y by X. There's some great things with that. And then there is the, let me go ahead and mark that one complete. And then there, you can see down below that I'm getting all of these green check marks and I'm getting closer to my certificate. And then finally, there is the sharing. Some of the quickest way that I share data out of JMP is I just copy it, paste it into Word or to PowerPoint. Also, creating JMP journals. I talk about how to export directly to PowerPoint, going to JMP Public and JMP Live, putting things on the JMP community, sharing your information there, getting some of your questions answered. And finally, we're finishing that section up, and I have all the sections there. So now it's time to potentially print my certificate. Well, it looks like that I've done quite poorly because I have only got 15% out of the 20 points, 15%. So it doesn't look like I'm going to get a certificate, but I've kind of worked this situation so I can show you what the certificate looks like. So I'm going to accept the results and get the certificate. Now, I'm not too proud of these results, but I'm going to accept them because I really want that certificate. If you wanted to know what you got wrong, why you didn't get this percentage, if you hit this view detailed results in a browser, you can actually see a report of all the things, the questions and what the answer was and whether or not you got it correct. Obviously, I didn't do all the activities, so I'm not too proud of that grade, but I still want their certificate, so I'm going to go ahead and accept the results. Oh, and there is my certificate. It gives me the opportunity to retype my name if I want. If I wanted to do Mr. Let me see. Let's say I wanted to do Mr. Ryan DeWitt. I can do that. I can update the name, and that says Mr. Ryan DeWitt, and then I can go ahead and restart the course here. I can exit the course, or I can print my certificate and put that up on the my office door. You know, I don't really have anything great up on my office door. But anyways, that is an overview of the kit. I'm going to restart the course, and I'm going to show you here. You have your 6 sections down below. So if you have any questions, you can email me at ryandewitt@jump.com, or go ahead and there's a community post that you can add any questions, or if there's anything that you would like added to the kit, please let me know. Thanks for watching.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. 15%. That's maybe not something you want to hang on your office door. But like Ryan said, you can interact with us at the community. So if you have questions for Ryan about the New User Welcome Kit, certainly make your way over to the Jump On Air section of our community and interact with him on the post about the New User Welcome Kit. So we hope you try it. Ryan did a really brilliant job developing it. And so it's certainly a resource as you're getting started with Jump that you'll want to check out. Again, check out the community page, community.jump.com, and navigate to the Jump On Air section. You'll find all the on-demand videos from today's episode, as well as previous episodes, if you want to catch up on shows we've had. Certainly follow us on all the different social media platforms. We post out lots of great things, and we'd love to be able to share those with you. Check out the program guide to see what's coming up, and certainly share Jump On Air with your colleagues and friends if you're finding value. Again, the link to share with them is jump.com/JOA, which will take them to the actual page with the program and the ability for them to subscribe. So jump.com/JOA. We hope you join us Friday, 11 a.m., same time, same place. We hope you stay safe. We hope you stay healthy. We hope you stay close, even if you're keeping your distance. Take care, everyone.